All right, no better time than the present to get started. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining the Voice from the Field webinar. My name is Jonathan Norton. I am the founder and CEO of Rope Safe USA. I'm also a combat veteran and former Army Ranger that did a lot of high angle rope rescue training and real world operational experience. But today I'm just really excited that we have a panelist within your community, panelist of highly experienced firefighters that are here to bring to share their experiences with you and to add value not only to yourself but to your department. We will be recording this, and we'll be sharing the recording with each and every one of you, so you can bring this back to your departments and share it with multiple shifts. But for those who are on the call, just to, we all are acutely aware of the the unique kind of circumstances that you all are in right now, not only with the coronavirus pandemic, but also with the riots. And so we all, the audience consists predominantly of firefighters and police officers. So I want to personally extend a thank you to each and every one of you, but also kind of wishing you and your firefighters and police officers safety during this unprecedented time. So without further ado, I am going to I'm going to introduce the moderator, and the moderator will introduce the panelists, and then we'll be taking questions from the audience too. We're going to make this as interactive as possible, and we'll be polling you all to get your perspective as well. So that being said, I want to introduce to you Paul Conway. So Paul, let me pull up his bio really quickly so you all can see it. But man, that probably needs no introduction. Paul Conway, he is going to be moderating and facilitating the conversation today. And many of you all know Paul as just a veteran and fire chief, served in multiple capacities in the Milwaukee Fire Department, but also served his community as a volunteer firefighter. He's been responsible for coordinating federal, state, and local agencies to improve training and response capabilities. And he is also an entrepreneur at heart, as the founder of Conway Shields, and he leads a very successful company. So Paul, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
And I thank you for having me. I again, like you are, I'm very excited that I'm here today. We have a great panel, and these are people that I've worked with in the past, both in training and in just the fire service in general. First, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, and this gentleman is firefighter Tim Anderson. He is with the Philadelphia Fire Department, Squad 72, as you can see. He's with Special Operations Command, 19 years in the fire service, working with rope rescue and fireground special operations. And he is also an entrepreneur and founder of Anderson Rescue Solutions, which creates and manufactures equipment for rope rescue in the fire service and other fields. Secondly, on the panel, we have Captain Miguel Rosado. Captain Rosado is a 12-year veteran of the New Haven Fire Department. He is currently on a truck company. He is a Pro Board certified, an adjunct instructor in the Fire Academy, and is a rescue specialist for USAR Task Force, Massachusetts Task Force 1. And lastly, we have Captain Brian McNulty, who is a 21-year veteran of the fire service with the City of Milwaukee Fire Department. He is currently the captain of Rescue Company 2 in the City of Milwaukee, and he heads up the training division of Conway Shield. So these gentlemen are very knowledgeable in their field. I would refer to them as experts in many things that they do. But certainly, as we all know in this field, we are always students of the game, and we are always students of this craft and this profession. So with that, what I would like to do is we have a couple of questions we have set up, and I would like to address them. And as John said, we understand that when we originally started this, it was an idea of how do we operate under the current situation of COVID-19. And we certainly know that the world dynamics have changed around us recently, but some of these things are timeless, and they bring up challenges to us no matter what type of environment we're in. And one of the things that we thought about or we discussed on this panel was firehouse training, and how are we going to maximize our training when we have limited access to either our acquired structures or our training academy. Before it was they didn't want companies out in the field because of COVID, and now we have concerns about safety, so companies are also restricted to the firehouses, at least in the area where I am in Wisconsin. And so it does create a problem of how do we still train? How do we still maintain a readiness? So Captain McNulty, in the current conditions, how does it affect your training with your fire department right now?
So good morning. So the biggest change for us, so I guess a historical perspective helps us with this question. So historically, we trained in 3 ways that led to what I thought was a high level of proficiency. And that was that we did hands-on daily training on the apparatus floor. So go over equipment, basic skills. And then we had trainings with our community partners. So we did a lot of training with, as far as like a confined space, we would hook up with Campbell Soup as an example, or we would had relationships with the hospitals where we could do high angle drills off their parking structures. And then we had large scale drills. So we did 10 large scale drills a year as a team. And those were probably with the crawl, walk, run philosophy where we did our most running. So once COVID set in and the restrictions on training started, where we saw the biggest change was with those trainings with the community partners outside the firehouse. And then those large scale trainings was a no-go. So we were just down to running our drills on the apparatus floor. So that just made us take a hard look at how we accomplished our same goals as far as proficiency goes, but just doing it kind of in a singular training approach instead of a multi-prong.
Captain Rosado, how about you?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's definitely changed. I mean, we became strictly restricted and we're on lockdown in a firehouse. The good thing is, right, if you look at the fire service, we are designed to adapt. Initially, right, you look at fire service, fire response, progress to EMS, hazmat incidents, multi-casualty incidents, active shooter, terrorist acts. So it's basically, we're encompassing every part. So this was just another form or another time period where the fire service had to adapt once again. Luckily, where I was previously assigned on the rescue, we always had some rigging set up. So we had high anchor points. We were basically able to mimic the situations that we respond to on an everyday type of basis. So it's kind of nice to have that adaptability within the firehouse, but we were pretty much, once again, like Captain said, we were restricted to just the firehouse.
Well, one thing for certain, the fire service always adapts. You are correct on that. No matter what the problem set is put in front of us, we always seem to overcome it. So that is a valid point. The other thing that we discussed a little bit was just mental readiness. And at the time with COVID, we had a decreased response, decreased level of responses. And we know that also affects how we can be mentally ready and how do we continually prepare ourselves. And we know that, I can speak from my time that when I was in slow companies, you had to work to make sure that you kept your edge sharp. In busy places, you're going and you have mental repetitiveness and you're set up. But as things slow down, that has a tendency to change. So one of the things that we were thinking about here is that response preparedness and, how do we change how we respond in the environment we're in right now? And as we talked about with our current situations of some of the disturbances, how do we change our response? So Cat Rosado, have you guys changed responses either in the prior adaptation or as to what we're doing now?
Oh, we definitely have. During the COVID phase, which obviously is still ongoing, what we did is we changed our level of awareness in PPE. So we would still have the same response levels with a engine company or an emergency LS unit, our same box assignments. The only difference is now, as we're responding on those calls, we have to be cognizant of always having either an N95 or a surgical mask. So that was a little change in the response level. Now with the protests and the riots going on, so far in the city of New Haven, we've had some fairly quiet protests, but it has disturbed some of our response levels. So it's now kind of proceed with caution. Don't just dive in and go right into that zone. Be aware of your surroundings and definitely focusing on that situational awareness.
Thank you. Excuse me, Firefighter Anderson, in your view, what do we do to prepare mentally in these current conditions for, let's say, high angle rescue? Because it is a very high risk, it can be a very high risk event, but low frequency. So how would you think that would be our best way to prepare for high angle rescue in the scenarios we're in now?
Right, good question. Good morning. So there's a couple things we can look at mentally. We spend a lot of time, particularly with technical rescue skills, developing physical proficiency, thinking of rope, knot tying, anchor building, system rigging. But that doesn't prepare us very well mentally, which is just as important, if not more important, for what we're doing. So there's a couple things we can do, sort of one don't and one do. The first thing we have to do is fight complacency. I know, again, up to just 2 weeks ago, things were quiet. I think everybody in the country's runs dropped a lot. So the first thing we have to do is recognize that just because run volume is down does not mean that tomorrow will be their next really big technical rescue incident. Thinking back in April, there was that really dramatic rescue off that bridge in the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia where that truck went over, and there was a pretty impressive high angle job those guys did to extricate the driver. And so I think it's important to remember that just because runs may be low or the situation may be calm, we need to be very mentally prepared for that, because the biggest risk we run is showing up unprepared for that. I had a job, it was a fire a couple years back, but we responded as second in engine company to a dwelling fire that we knew when we pulled out of the firehouse we could see the header, so we had some good smoke showing. So we knew we were going to a job. But my position that day, I was the backup guy on the line, and so I thought to myself, well, cool, we're going to a fire, but I'm the backup line on the second due engine. I'm not going to see any of it. It'll be, I'll be pushing some line around, but that's it. But we arrived. We ended up being there first in because of some mechanical issues with the first due engine. So all of a sudden it changed from, whoa, we were just second in and now we're first in. And I hop off the truck and do my normal, hey, is everybody out? And they say, no, there's a 4-year-old boy trapped on the 3rd floor. So that run went from being in this small little simple box of hey, this isn't a big deal, to all of a sudden an extremely high stress scenario. And I was ill-equipped to make that shift because I'd already mentally put this thing away. So thinking of tech rescue, it's a similar issue to where, you get dispatched on a vehicle down an embankment that turns out to be a vehicle off a cliff. And you need to be careful not to build a mental model that's simpler than the situation. So what can we learn from this? Expect uncertainty, expect friction. And if you expect a high level of technicality or difficulty to incidents, you can always be pleasantly surprised when they're simpler. But it's better to stay high speed than to start out low and have to make a sudden shift, because it's going to be difficult mentally and emotionally to perform well. So that's the first thing, is to fight complacency. The second big thing is we can practice mentally when we can't get out physically. Again, we're stuck in our firehouses now. A lot of rope guys will like to rig at least one big complicated system as frequently as they can, like a high line or something like that. We can't do that every day anyway, and now that kind of stuff is all shut down. But it's amazing what you can pull off mentally by just simply reviewing it in your mind or on a whiteboard. The current best rock climber in the world is this Czech guy named Adam Ondra, who a couple years ago climbed what was the hardest physical rock climb in the world. And he extensively had a physical trainer literally bend his body, just lying on his living room floor, so that he could mentally review all the moves he had to do to get through this climb. And he said, it's like, look, this thing's so hard, I can maybe practice it 20 times, but I can do it in my mind 200. I think that's a great lesson. So, you're stuck in the firehouse. You're limited by how complex you can physically build a system, but I can build whatever I want in my head. There's a lot you can do there. So the more you put effort into, kind of imagining these scenarios, the less surprised you're going to be when they come up. So we just need to not forget that mental component that we can really take advantage of to be ready during all this.
I have to say that I agree with you. I think that, there's some people may question the idea of when you go over scenarios in your head over and over and over again, and you visualize it just like an athlete, and I know the military does the same thing. When you start to visualize it, it really almost becomes that you've been there. And I think some of the greatest people I've worked with had a very good understanding of that. And whether they were on their way to work and they would look at the bridge that you mentioned, or they would see a window washer on their way in, and they would already think about mentally, all right, how are we going to get this? How are we going to get this person off? How are we going to rescue this? How are we going to do this? How are we going to operate together? That always seems to be the again, in order to even think we can get to a point where we can truly be a master of our craft, it has to be on our brain almost all the time. And I definitely will say that there is as you mentioned, when you start to get complacent and you head down a road where you think, well, I'm going to this alarm again, or this is another stuck elevator, it'll be nothing, or whatever that scenario is, you do start to put yourself into a position where if it is not as you perceived when you arrive, and you have a change in problem sets, as you put on this working fire, it puts you a half a step behind, and it gives you this sense of you're not moving in a fluid manner, because you expect A and you got B, and that creates friction in yourself, let alone all of the friction that's developed in the fire, on a fire scene or in a high angle rescue. So you're right. It's something that we have to always do it to fight the complacency and not be, this will be the same old thing. This will be nothing. We all know that when we do that in the fire service, not always, but it can come back to bite you, and it can get ugly in a hurry. So with that, we talked about scenario-based training and increasing our skills and our proficiencies and increasing the confidence of team members.
Hey, Paul,
and we normally do that.
I apologize. Do you mind if I just add I just wanted to ask a question of both yourself, if you don't mind.
By all means.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to what both Captain Rosado and Firefighter Anderson were sharing. If folks don't know him, Chris Voss spent 30 years as an FBI hostage negotiator, and he now runs an organization called the Black Swan Group, which trains firefighters, police officers, corporate executives in very, very intense, high stress type of corporate negotiations. And he uses a term that I thought may be relevant here, or a saying rather, that when in the context of training, is that people do not elevate to the circumstance, they default to their lowest level of training. So I'd like to bat that around a little bit. Paul, as in preparation for this webinar, you really gave some clear context that a high angle rescue never happens at 12 o'clock at noon. When it's sunny out and on a perfect conditions with a perfect anchor points, perfect ledge. So I'd like to kind of just discuss that concept of preparation for the rigors that you go through in preparing your teams. And when I was deployed forward to Iraq, we worked a lot with what civilians tend to call Delta Force, and we call it Combined Arms Group. And we frequently conducted several missions with Delta Force, and I ended up asking one of their task force leaders, kind of what's the mystique around Delta Force? What makes Delta so good? And his answer really surprised me. And he said that it's not that we're so skilled at some new and different techniques, is that we are masters of the basics. We train so that we never make a mistake. And I thought that was really interesting. So I'd love everybody, including Paul, to talk about, defaulting to your lowest level of training and training so that you're, not to get it right, but to not make a mistake.
Gentlemen, I'll divert to you guys first, and then I do have something that comes to mind, but by all means. Tim?
I think one of the things to think about there is personal honesty. We all know what our strengths are and our weaknesses, and it's a lot more fun to maintain our strengths than it is to admit and work on our weaknesses, because we're probably weak in those areas for a certain reason. So I think, looking at rope rescue per se, we probably have areas that we shine in more than others. But I think it's important to be clear with yourself and evaluate both on your physical skills and your mental readiness. I've always, one of the things I learned from that fire that I mentioned and a couple other pretty crazy incidents was to just do a mental check of, am I ready for this? It's really fast. It's simple to kind of reset yourself. But getting yourself in a state where, hey, yeah, I am confident that I could pull this off today, that I am ready for this, means that when it comes, you're not going to be surprised. But then that big piece of saying, look, I'm weak over here. I know I need to work on that, and taking responsibility for your actions in that way, and for your readiness. The more honest you can be with yourself, the better an operator you're going to be on game day.
Captain Rosado, what do you think of that? Or I should say, what do you feel is your experience in this?
No, I agree. It's basically that adaptability. I like to kind of put myself in, not necessarily in this box, but say I'm an outside the box thinker. Be able to adapt to suggestions and ideas. Be able to come up with plan A, B, C, D, F if you need to, kind of on the fly, saying, all right, I'm running into this situation. This may not work. Let me take a quick step back. Will this slight change make a difference? Be able to have that confidence to turn around in your crew. Hey guys, do you see something that I'm not seeing? So that's part of that, being honest with yourself. So as a company officer, a lot of people look for you for direction and kind of take the step and the lead. But sometimes even as a company officer, it helps to have that crew or that ability to take other individuals' ideas and thought process and kind of mold them and meld them all together so that you can come up with one fluid solution.
Ryan, what do you got an insight to this?
Yeah, I like what John said about the Delta operator and this, like the mastering of the basics and the equipment. And I think that's an absolute necessity. I mean, we talked about it at the kitchen table, and why would we ever bring a problem to a scene that there's already going to be a problem that we have to solve? And what I mean by that is, if you don't know your equipment on your rig, why would you bring that problem, a stumbling block, that in the middle of some chaos that you wouldn't know how to operate an MPD, or you wouldn't know how to operate, you wouldn't know how to force a door with a Halligan, or know how to use your tools properly. Why would you bring those problems? So we really drill that, mastering those basics, so that when we get to the scene and all the other points introduce themselves, the points of frictions, poor communication, poor visibility, increased stress through, patient interaction, that those are the things we can focus on. And our equipment is just kind of a fluid part of what we do. So I think that, what John said, I think that's a huge part of success for companies.
Cap, I'm going to steal your why bring a problem to a problem line. I like that a lot. I just wrote that down. That's brilliant.
Well, and that is absolutely. And certainly one of the things that we all know in the fire service is we one of the best things we have here is our ability to exchange information with each other. And like we say, we steal things from each other and use what would be the best practice. Or I know Technical Rescue has said it forever, that we fill our toolbox with as many tools as we possibly can, so that when we come upon that scenario, we have a vast array of tools to look at and say, let's use this one or that one. There's nothing that's right or wrong. It's just, is it right for the scenario we have? I know as a company officer, and I'm comfortable that the panel would most likely agree that it's difficult even, and sometimes I think it might be even more difficult in a busy company, because you're running, you're doing your work. But I know that I've always felt it was responsibility of the company officer, that was me, that I care about the citizens that we protect, and I care about the firefighters that rode the vehicle with me, to the point where I never wanted to see them fail, which meant that sometimes, much like a parent, you have to make decisions and do things that they're not particularly fond of. And I think that we used to call it the Heavy Urban Rescue Team, which then transformed into the rescue companies in the city of Milwaukee. Our job was to do high angle, trench, confined space, and building collapse, along with specialized vehicle extrication, and then also RIT at greater alarms, which meant that we have a huge basket full of things we need to know. And certainly we had experts at each different field. But quite often what I would find is that and they didn't particularly like me for it at the time, but as we were saying, that it doesn't happen. These scenarios don't always happen on a beautiful sunny day when it's 70 degrees and we have our best A-team on the vehicle. We might have somebody, and I'll be the first one to say that, for example, confined space wasn't necessarily my forte, mostly because of the math involved in cubic space and the airflow and how to move things around. So I would depend and defer on another senior person, as Miguel said, that you use the team and be able to look at all of the skill sets within the team. But I think I used to do drills that we would be out on an EMS run and we'd be returning, and we were assigned to a ladder company, and I would tell the driver, pull over and let's rig for the boat, because we used to have to put our rib boat in for the dive team. And they'd look at me and say, have you lost your mind? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. We've been up all day, and now you want to go put the boat, want to rig for the boat? Well, the purpose of that was that we have to always know the small skills. The small skills build off of that into our big skills. And the last thing we want to ever do is have failure because we didn't train on the little things. And it really did become at times somewhat of a friction between myself and the company. But as time went on, and later on in life, and I think as a good company officer and even as a battalion chief, they're your people, and they deserve every opportunity to succeed. And we have to be able to give them that opportunity. And sometimes we have to give them a little nudge and make sure that they're heading in that direction, so that we don't give them an opportunity to fail. If they fail, it's because we let them down. So in turn, like I said, I would do these types of drills and they would say, you're crazy. But they would always do them because they knew that we weren't going home until we did. But, it's just, those are the type of things I think that develop that skill set that makes good teams. And that makes, as they say, that's what makes the Delta as good as they are, because they train. When they think they have it, let's train one more time. So that's excellent, John. I think that's a very good feed-in as to how to keep those skill sets ready.
Yeah, Paul, if I may, I mean, you said a lot there. You said a lot to unpack, and a lot of really, really great stuff. And one thing that I just pulled away from this is, why you did it. Because you care about the citizens that you protect and the firefighters under your responsibility. And in my experience as an infantry officer and Army Ranger instructor, my responsibility was for the safety of over 1,000 Ranger students per year and the 12 instructors that were under my charge. And so that sense, that burden of responsibility per se really drove me to do to train our instructors, knowing that these Ranger students are going to be going to combat. And that magnitude really caused us to increase the standard, knowing that what I train this young lieutenant who will go forward to Iraq or Afghanistan, may be the difference between saving his life and the life of his platoon. But I wanted to also drill into something that you said, Paul. It never happens on a sunny 70-degree day. It's 2 a.m. with sleeting rain, and you just woke up from and you're ready. 2 minutes later, you're on the apparatus moving out to a high angle rescue scene. And Tim, this is something you've brought up to me in the past, that we've all seen different companies on Instagram that will show you a 17-to-1 system and these highly complex rope these different anchoring systems. But I'd love to get your perspective, and maybe teeing off with Captain McNulty on the essence of simplicity in kind of high angle rescue training and then during kind of real world experience.
So one of the things we did in the last year, so we just we seemed to keep getting more complex. And that took a lot of training time to kind of meet those training goals as that complexity increased. So we met with all the heads we divide our specialties up into committee heads, and we met with everybody, and we tried to strip everything down to its basic components. And then what we did is we took those basic components and we built trainings from that. So if, we talk about the Arizona Vortex, so a piece of equipment that could be very complex. And like Paul said, everybody's got their specialty within the specialties. And though, I do rope, I probably wouldn't be the guy that you want out front, leading the charge. I really rely on my people. So the narrow vortex has always kind of been my nemesis. So, but what we did is we said, okay, for the Milwaukee Fire Department, the runs we respond to in the area that we respond to, what do we need that piece of equipment to do? So we built modules that said, okay, when we use the Arizona Vortex, these are the iterations of that we're going to train to be proficient on. And then we just continually trained on that evolution, that module that we had built, that we had found that as far as our needs, that module that we built, that version of the Arizona Vortex is what we needed to succeed. And we did that with almost everything that we do. Our rope systems, our patient packaging, we do it with firefighting drills, whether it be hose lays, forcible entry, patient movement. And we built those modules. So because we have so much to cover, we took a hard look at, instead of getting into the weeds on all these processes and all these pieces of equipment, what did we find most important? And then really drilling and really mastering those things that we thought were important.
All right. So I think we got a good understanding of that. There is more to it, and there is a definite concept that we have to start with the small things and work and build and find out, compartmentize what's important to us, and then train and work on those items. So with that, if we have scenario-based training and we want to increase the skills and proficiency and the confidence of the team with training exercises, how can we modify in today's in the environment we have today, or for that matter, just all the time? How do we modify our training scenarios to gain that maximum effectiveness of the opportunity we have to train? Captain Rosado, you have a suggestion on that?
Yes, I actually do. It has a lot to do with a topic that we talked about earlier, mental preparation and putting those individuals on your team in that mindset. So I'll give you a perfect example. You have a car down an embankment. Now, physically, you can't mimic that in the firehouse, but you can pull out that piece of equipment. Hey guys, tell me a little bit about what you plan on doing here. What piece of equipment would you like to use? What are we going to rig this to? We have a column in the firehouse where now we can mimic that outdoor scenario, but yet indoors. Hey, let's grab that sling, actually rig the sling like we would if we were on this actual call. Grab the grip hoist, let's set everything up, mimic this situation. How would we hold this car in place? How would we extricate the person out of this vehicle? So taking that mental readiness approach of, hey, let's just go over the piece of equipment, become familiar with it, touch it, exercise it, and let's set up a practical scenario, even if it's just the rigging components without actually executing it, so that we have that mental state and basically at the same time getting that mechanical input into that situation before that situation actually arises.
I'd like to ask or present a question from the audience. I think it goes in right what you're sharing, Captain Rosado. And this is from John Rogowski. And John asks, have you done the scenario in which a piece of equipment gets removed each time, or less equipment, or a technical version of musical chairs? I suspect that may be something where you are changing out different members into different roles, if I'm interpreting that question correctly, John. But Miguel, would you mind, answering that question? And again, do you have a scenario in which a piece of equipment gets removed, or some sort of technical version of musical chairs? Captain Rosado, you're on mute.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. Yep.
Sorry about that. One of the things I personally believe in is growth. What I like to do with my members and my crew is put them in positions as being the officer or a position that they're usually not in. So if you take a look, taking maybe the junior private and say, you know what, for today's evolution, you're going to be the rigging boss. How would you like to rig this operation? One, it gets them out of their comfort zone, but it also gets them the opportunity to basically become a leader, step up, and take charge of that situation. Now, as far as the musical chairs, if we take a look at a lot of the equipment that's out there now, we have, the Petzl Maestro, we have the MPD, which is making it a lot easier for us to lower and convert our systems, right? But there's going to be those occasions where we still need to utilize the brake bar or a rescue 8 with ears. So occasionally, hey, we're going to run this same scenario, but guess what? The MPD is completely out of play. Let's see if we can revert back to those skills of lowering someone with a brake bar, being able to lock it off, and then converting that system to be able to haul them back up. So that's kind of one of the aspects I put into when it comes to musical chairs, and also that growth prospect of it of, hey, today, guess what? You're the IC, you're going to be the operations, you're the rig boss. Let's see what we come up with. And, let's actually hear out their ideas, because this is how we get them to become stronger in the technical rescue world, right? Everything that we see when we come across a situation isn't black and white. It falls into that very gray area. So they're always kind of looking for an answer. Hey, is it this way or that way? Well, you know what? Let's see what you come up with, and let's test out that idea, which very well may fall into that gray area. Now, we also talk about simplicity. So one of the things we also have worked on is trying to set up, just like Captain McNulty said, that Arizona Vortex for certain practices. Hey, what do you think the best setup would be for an elevator operation? What about a high angle lowering operation? And whatever we came up with, this is going to be our go-to, so that we have that muscle memory and we can always revert back to that training. Hey, simple is better sometimes. Instead of making it complex, here, we're going to take the A-frame and cantilever it. No, what if we just set up a regular A-frame with the easel leg? Or what if we just turn the Arizona Vortex upside down so that we can use it for an elevator operation, and that becomes everyone's go-to? It's less to remember and easier to set up. Now, one thing, if you guys don't mind, I want to add, yesterday we actually had a high angle rescue call. So we want to revert back to that simplicity. Yesterday the call came in, a young lady went off trail, she got stuck, she was in a position where she couldn't get herself up or back down. So we took basically a two-pronged approach. The rescue company headed up to the top. 2 truck companies were at the base trying to search to see her location. Eventually, we basically had to travel through the trail. Once the trail dead ended, basically there was a lot of loose rock, shale, loose debris. So it was definitely a difficult hike to get to where she was. And she was still about from the off trail about 100 feet up. At this point in time, there was limited rope equipment. Everything was with the rescue up top, and they were setting for a vortex operation to come up and over. I requested a couple of pieces of equipment. I noticed some crevices where a small attic ladder could fit. We can kind of leapfrog to her. We had some overhauling line. So getting back to that simplicity, I took the overhauling line and basically set up a lead climbing operation, rigging it to a couple of small trees we had, tying it off every few trees, going up in her direction, creating handholds for the individuals to climb and hold on to. And eventually it came down to an overhauling line tied off with a 20-foot piece of webbing to be able to get to this young lady, secure her, help her slide down the rope with additional members until she was safely back on that shale area. But eventually we got her down to the trail and we were able to walk her out. So if you take a look, right, we talk about technical rescue, MPDs, Petzl IDs, the revolver, the carabiner with a pulley action on it. And we talk about 1/2-inch rope, 11mm rope. But this just came down to a simple lead climb operation with overhauling line and a piece of webbing to secure a young lady's safety and get her back down to the ground.
Anybody else like to comment on that? That's nice work. That's good work. That's that. It for those that remember the pop. That's the old pompier belts and manila rope kind of thing. But that's good work. Excellent.
Yeah, a couple thoughts as well. One thing you can do is try to run the same scenario, but do it a lot of different ways. Either, we had an incident recently in Philadelphia where I work, where a guy on the roof accidentally put the saw blade into his thigh. He miraculously missed his artery and any ligaments and everything. So he's actually back to work already. But we were running a scenario, okay, we're on the roof working. How do we get a guy down in an emergency? And we tried a bunch of different ways to do it. And then we stripped everything away and said, okay, this happens now. What do you have on you that you can make this happen? And that's always great with scenario-based training, to throw some good curveballs where, okay, we're going to do this right now with what you have on you. That's it. You can't get any other equipment. You have to be creative, improvise, and make it work. Or similarly, like whenever we're doing some team-based confined space stuff, we always like to have a rescuer go down as a surprise somewhere in the course of the scenarios. If you're getting a team spun up and ready and doing a lot of work, it's great. You'll have them get the patient out of the hole, and they're all focused on that. And then you tell the victim or one of the rescuers in the hole, say, hey, lay down and go unconscious. And it's always interesting to see how teams respond to this. Wait a second, where's rescuer 1? We haven't heard from them in a while. And they look in the hole, and there they are laying there where they can't get in touch with them. And that always throws a big challenge into the scenario to see how well your team will adapt to friction and things happening without a plan. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit. I think it's an absolute necessity. The question that was asked by the audience members that to do that musical chairs and to strip away equipment once in a while. I think that as the fire service in general, we are great at over-engineering things. I mean, if I look at the rescue, I probably have got multiple ways to accomplish the same drill. So what we'll do is we'll strip away equipment. Maybe a drill we've historically done with airbags, we'll take airbags out of it. And we'll just see how the guys react. I think it teaches them the other equipment on the rig and the uses for it, maybe that they didn't think was a historical use for that piece of equipment. But now with the, minus the airbags, okay, now that piece of equipment I can see working in this scenario. I think there's a great story I think it was out of New York. They had a woman trapped under a car. An engine company rolls upon her. If we have a person trapped under a car, we're going to bring our floor jack. We're probably going to bring a TL9 with a spreader, some cribbing. But they didn't have any of that. And what they used is some hose bundles and a ladder to put that under there, use it as a lever, and lifted the car up and got the woman out, right? So, if you're talking about stripping it down to the basics and looking at things through a different lens, that sums it up pretty well. And I think, in the rescue companies and the truck companies, I think that's an important skill to have to be able to look at things from multiple points of view and be able to attack the same problem with multiple pieces of equipment and not over engineering it. And I think the musical chairs training concept does that well.
Excellent. Excellent. So as leaders and senior members, how do we increase team proficiency? I mean, we have to think about things like, how do we get immediate feedback on performance? Or we take, as you mentioned earlier, we have cross-training and roles. We have so many responsibilities and so many different skill sets that need to be required that we have technician level of others and others are not necessarily at the same level. And most of all, how do we keep our people invested and how do we keep them interested? There's certainly, there are companies that, I'll speak for myself, there are companies that I worked at that spent most of their time deciding what was going to be on TV today. And then there were companies that they worked constantly. And I was fortunate to work in companies that either were going to runs all day or they were training, both as a firefighter and then as a company officer and as a battalion chief. And I think that there's a chance or an opportunity for burnout there. And we certainly don't want to lose good people. We know that job, to have that continual training, can be stressful to people. So how do we, Brian, how do we keep our people engaged, and how do we get them so they're cross-trained in different roles and that we can understand feedback? We have a good feedback. We have the whole team, as Captain Rosado said, the team changes and we put people in different positions, and we have informal leaders that can come to the boss and say, hey, I think we got to do this, or I think we got to do that. How do we keep that so it's a very well-oiled, cohesive machine that, again, can do its job to not only protect the firefighters that we ride with, but most of all, and most importantly, is to protect those citizens that we serve?
Yeah, I guess that question hits on a lot of points. I guess the thing I'll focus on is how do I keep, where do I see the most value in my senior members, and how am I keeping them involved? Those of us in the fire service who have a senior man on the rig, strong senior man, know the absolute value of that and the benefit to the company, whether it be in-house or on the street. So how do we keep those members, and where do we see the most value of them? And an example I'll use is that if we look at training, and we'll just look at rope training, if we're progressing through a training and we're doing skills on the apparatus floor, a senior man leading that training is a great thing for them, because it shows that, no matter how far you progress in your career, you still have to focus on those basics to those young people. Probably where I see the most value in our senior members, and the most value for myself and the most value for the young members, is that when we progress into those scenarios and we start to ramp things up and we start to introduce different friction points, so that we're not only doing the basic skills, but now, we've introduced, a more physical aspect to it, poor communications, just made the drill harder. And that's where I really see those senior members come forward and their experience shine, where they can talk to those younger members. And it kind of goes back to what Tim said. And it's not that they're talking to them about how the equipment works so much, but they're really talking to them about the mental side of the house, where they're talking to them like, take that deep breath, step back, look at it. It's all right. Calm yourself down. That's where I see value, not only in training, but that so mimics what we do on the street. That's where I see the growth in training, or we see the growth in training that replicates itself on the street. I know that was kind of disjointed, but that's where I see the value.
Excellent. Jonathan, I know that we're
briefly, Chief, if that's okay.
Say again, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
I'd like to add on what Brian was saying.
Absolutely.
Real briefly. I think it's a great point, and certainly as complexity in the scenario grows, that tends to be where training starts to kick in, and experience As a ranger instructor, we would run full scale combat simulations in a mountainous environment at the local, which is basically 42 rangers. And what we would often do as an instructor is that during a given scenario, when we would do night raid missions, and during that scenario, we would often do down leader drills where we would take the platoon leader and we would literally say, okay, now you are dead, platoon leader, and see how the situation unfolds, see how the team responds. Or we would introduce mass casualty, mass cal scenarios, which, again, these scenarios may not be applicable to the fire department, but I just love for Captain Rosado and for the panel to briefly discuss things you can introduce to start to increase the complexity of the scenarios so that your team can be prepared when that does happen.
Sure, but real quick, I'd like to touch back on the last part we were just discussing. One of the things to keep members involved, I remember when I started, I had an officer who would pull a different piece of equipment off the rig every day. And my fear, so to speak, was never being prepared for what piece of equipment was being pulled off. So it caused me to take more time with the truck checks, pull out the piece of equipment, try to engage it myself, kind of troubleshoot on my own so I can be prepared, which led me to take classes, develop my own skills, learn a little more. I've kind of taken a similar, but slightly different approach where I talk to my crew members, hey, what do you guys want to do today? So I kind of let them pick. So if it's something in their comfort zone, right, it gets that member buy-in and they're more apt to do it. Well, guess what? We did something that you wanted. Let's also work on something that you're a little weaker at. And it's actually gotten to the point where the members, before I even get an opportunity to ask them what's going on today, they're like, hey, Cap, can we do this today? Whether it's when I was on the rescue, we haven't touched the hydrofusions in a while. Can we go out and try to lift something or just set them up? Can we stabilize something? We throw in a spot shore. To yesterday on the truck company, hey, Cap, do you mind if I fly the aerial a few times? I'm working on this. And I actually can we go out and tiller even if it's around the firehouse? And yesterday we wound up setting an old school, water tower just in the back, just a dry run. And now these are the members approaching me, and what better feeling as an officer, or instead of you having to pick what's going on, the member comes up to you and say, hey, we want to do something today. This is what we have in mind. I mean, think about how much easier your day as an officer is going to be, the member buy-in that you have from your crew and how that keeps that cohesion. So I took bits and pieces kind of from the old school with obviously the generational change that we're also having in the fire service, kind of melted the two together. And those are some of the things that I've been able to come up with. Now to the second part, how do we build up those stressors? It's a combination of some of the stuff that Tim was saying, earlier. Hey, and the musical chairs. We want to be able to lift this today, but I'm going to take all these items away from you. How are you going to accomplish this? And one of the ironic things that Brian had actually said was, you look at your typical airbag operations. So everyone looks, all right, here we have a car, we have to lift, but we also tend to forget simplicity. And hey, a simple floor jack with a couple of pieces of cribbing can accomplish the same thing. So guess what? I'm going to take all the airbags away. Let's see if you can remember that we still have the floor jack on the rig and we can quickly exercise that. So one of those things, because we also revert to, like we said, our level of training and what we always physically touch. So if we're always touching those airbags, but that floor jack comes out once during the month, maybe twice at best, we forget that it's there and be like, man, this scenario we made it more difficult than what it needs to be, but it was really just this simple. Had we remember the floor jack was right here, we take that out, we lift, we crib, the person's out, or that limb that's stuck underneath there, problem solved.
I've always said with rope rescue, the danger in training complexity is that you're tempted to always be complex when you have to pull it out. I feel like, there's a kind of a push with rope stuff to, the sexier looking the system, the better. But the problem is then you try to duplicate that on the rescue ground and it's not appropriate all the time. So simplicity is always key.
Excellent, excellent. All those were some really great points. I'd like to open the floor up to any questions that we might have from the audience. John, if you have anything that the audience would like to ask, just kindly let us know. Otherwise, I think we're going to be in the process of wrapping up here. But do we have any questions, John?
Yeah, Tony from the audience, and I'm gonna try to find you to unmute you here, Tony. Let me see if I can get you. All right, Tony, you are unmuted, and feel free to ask your question, sir.
Yeah, gentlemen, thanks for your time. One of the questions that I had was with volunteer and paid on-call fire departments, we have an issue getting good quality scenario-based technical rescue training in the time allotted. Basically, a couple hours every week that we train together that we're able to get to the firehouse. Do you guys have any suggestions or ways we can use their time more wisely when it comes to that training?
So I guess one of the things I'll add is this might help you out. So when we were on the floor, so I assume the volunteers come, you have an hour and a half or 2 hours to do a training. Would that be right? Okay, so
I muted him. I apologize.
okay, no worries. Is that we would look at what value was scenario-based training doing, and a lot of times it was the friction points that were introduced. So if you look at your drill that you might do with your people on the apparatus floor, say you're doing some basic technical rescue. Say we were doing shoring, so we were building T-shores. So we could build T-shores and 2 posts, but then we would look at if we had the ability to go out and do a scenario, a larger time block or vacant structure. The things that were the benefit of that is that we were further away from our apparatus. There was a time delay in getting the shoring from point A to point B. The people were more spread out. So what we introduced in the firehouse was we would, put the cut team outside the firehouse, and then we'd build the shores in the basement, and we would introduce radios instead of face-to-face communication. And just those little changes led to more of a realistic representation of how it is at an actual event. And I think would turn a simple firehouse drill and add a little more gusto to it, a little more value for your members.
I have a couple thoughts as well on that. I'm also currently an active volunteer fireman, and my hat's off to all volunteer firemen everywhere, because it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work to pull off and do well, especially when you have very limited time. It stresses the need for preparation, especially for the guys leading the training, because if you only have an hour and a half to do twice a month or whatever, you need to be ready to roll the second people walk in. And that's one of the big things I've seen. If guys are standing around, they lose interest. But I also just wanted to throw out there, during the COVID-19 stuff, which hasn't, depending on what part of the country you're in, hasn't calmed down yet, a lot of volunteer fire departments have had to cut training out entirely. Some guys have moved stuff to online, where they have had, small groups of guys film a video on a specific topic, a specific operational procedure, a specific piece of equipment, and kind of send it around to all the members. And that's certainly been helpful. But I also think there's a bit of a risk assessment that needs to be done by chiefs and leaders of volunteer organizations. It's safe to show up and be on the truck apparently when the alarm goes off, but it's not safe to prepare to show up to be on the truck when the alarm goes off. So there's a lot of, we kind of need to look ourselves in the mirror as far as, what is the greater risk, COVID-19 or not being able to do a job that could kill you and that you're going to go do anyway. So that's a little bit off tangent, but the volunteer guys have it stacked against them with lack of training, lack of time on the apparatus. Even the slowest career station that's not training is at least on the truck every day and has to touch the equipment. So if you're a volunteer and things have been kind of shut down due to all this, it's going to take a lot more work on your part to stay mentally ready and prepared. And that's some stuff that volunteer officers really need to think about as to what the best way to keep the guys in the game, because the fires are just as hot, the rescues are just as complex when you are not getting paid to do it. So it's definitely a lot of creativity that has to go into being ready, especially during what's going on now.
All right, gentlemen, we're at our time limit. I guess I want to run real quickly for final thoughts from the panel. Captain Rosado, do you have anything you'd like to put in there as a final thought?
Two things, if I could just touch on that last part. One of the things that I would also suggest would be like a building block. So we look at the technical rescue rope aspect. You know, 1 week, maybe like, look at what we're doing now. We're on Zoom, so we're able to connect through, you know, different media. Just a quick PowerPoint on some technical rescue aspects when it comes to rope. Maybe the next time you get together, just tying some knots. Third time you get together, building some simple mechanical advantage systems. And maybe by the fourth time you get together, running a simple evolution down a low embankment, just to kind of put all those skills together. So this way you're not trying to fit, you know, an 8-hour day where individuals giving up, you know, an important family day on a Saturday or Sunday or even on a Monday night altogether. But you break it down into those small increments, which makes it easier for maybe you guys to work around and continue to build on those skills. But my final thoughts are, you know, just keep learning. Like I said, I'm still a student of the game. There's plenty of things that I've learned from the panelists today and thoughts and ideas that I'll take back to my current company I use in training. You know, never be afraid to continue learning no matter what you've learned to this point is what I'll leave everyone with.
And Tim, final thoughts?
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here today. When it comes to everything, my sort of focus for the fire service has got to be humility, because you just never know when that test is coming. And I've had the displeasure of being humbled on several occasions when I wasn't expecting it. And so that's kind of changed my mindset of how I approach this. So be it COVID, be it riots, be it anything, keep your head in the game so that you're ready when it comes, but enjoy this opportunity.
And Brian.
Thank you as well. I mean, I think Tim hit it on the head. You know, keep your head in the game. You know, this is a challenge, and I think at the COVID's been a challenge as far as training and a lot of other things. And I think we'll look at it at the end. That those among us who took that, as we do a lot of things in the fire service, that it was a point for growth, and that we came out better at the end of it and stronger as you know, whether it be your individual firehouse or a department as a whole.
Thank you. You know, for myself, I'll just say this. A long time ago, unfortunately, it seems like yesterday, but Captain Patty Brown of FDNY made a statement that said, you can do everything right in this job and still get killed. And I've always taken that to heart, because I know this is a very dangerous job and our folks put themselves in jeopardy all the time. And I think if there's anything that we learn from this panel here today, it is that we are always students of the game. We always have to keep our head in the game. We always have to learn and learn more and train more. And when we're done doing that training, train some more. Because this job, we all know, will humble us. I don't think there's a firefighter on this panel. I don't think that there is most likely of our people listening that have not been humbled in something that we thought, was going to be a no-brainer. I'm going to crawl in here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Something changes. Next thing you know, I'm sitting in a room that's 10 by 15, which is a bedroom, and I'm telling myself, doggone it, I'm going to die here. How could I be so dumb? This is humbling. Gentlemen, it was a real pleasure. I hope that we can continue on this. But today was truly a pleasure listening to all of you with your experience and your knowledge and the things you bring to the fire service. I thank you all. I just want to remind everyone that we thank all of you for what you're doing here and the service you provide to your cities, to your communities, and for always being there. No matter what the challenges, no matter what goes on, for always being there. And for that, I thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Jonathan. Here we are, sir. Thank you.
Folks, thank you very much, panelists, and for Paul leading the conversation, and most importantly, thank you to the attendees that took time out of your busy day to listen in. And we got some really great information from you and during our polls, and we will definitely be providing this recording to you via email so that you can share with different shifts. And we've got some great follow-up webinars feedback for you so we can bring another panel in front of you and your department. But folks, I just want to leave you with be safe and thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you again on our next upcoming webinar. Take care.